Well, hello to all of my methodical researchers out there. Today's topic is historical statutes, and this one is important. It comes up pretty frequently, so you need to pay close attention. So, when we're dealing with historical statutes, we're asking what was the law at a specific time in the past? In most situations, statutes do not apply retroactively. So this is often an important question for us to ask in our research. For example, if your client is accused of committing a crime on some particular date in the past, you don't need to know what the applicable statute says now. You need to know what it said then. That's generally going to be the applicable law. Now, it's not terribly complicated to find this information, and fortunately, both Westlaw and Lexis have implemented these really helpful features that make it a lot easier. So the first thing you'll do when you're doing this historical statutory research is to consult the history or credit section of the statutory section that you're researching in order to find out when that section was last updated. You'll be asking yourself, when it was updated in relation to, say, the relevant conduct of your client. Whatever the issue is, you'll be trying to figure out the chronology of the law in relation to that factual pattern. Now, we've discussed how to essentially do this, how to look up that last update of the statutory section in our previous module on codified law, so you should be pretty familiar with that already. So the next thing you'll do is to actually look up that prior version of the section. And you can do that pretty easily just by using the archived code versions on Lexis, or on Westlaw, you would go to the History tab for that. I'll show you what that looks like in practice in just a moment. And when you do that, you'll want to be extra careful to check the effective dates. You want to check the effective date for that historical version of the statute because it's usually going to be different from the date it was enacted by the legislature, and it will have the additional wrinkle of becoming ineffective whenever the new version became effective. So you've got to figure all of that in to your research when you're trying to determine what law was in effect at what time. Now, both Westlaw and Lexis, as I alluded to earlier, also have some very convenient features that allow you to directly compare the various historical versions of any particular statutory section to the current incarnation in the code. And this can really be pretty useful. I'll show you just how it works, well, right now. Okay, so I'm on Lexis here. I've got a section of the OCGA that some of you might be at least indirectly familiar with. It concerns this alternative motor vehicle tax in Georgia. It's kind of a long statute, actually a pretty darn long statute, and it's really dry material, definitely not what they would call recreational reading or anything like that. And if we just keep scrolling past all of this text, we will finally end up in our history section here. In this history section, if we just look at the end of it, it's going to let us know the most recent time that it was amended. So we can see that it was amended in 2019, and it really looks like pretty recently it has been amended very many times. And we can also use the archived code versions to look at any one of these historical versions of the statutory section to see what it looked like before and after these various amendments. And to do that, we just go to About This Document, and then we can see archived code versions right here. And if we click on that, it's just got all of these different versions of the code that we can check out. And these are just the code as it was in effect on various dates. And we'll just go to our first result here. The statute as it was before this most current amendment. And you can also use this compare versions tool to do a comparison of these different versions. And this is just going to automatically be set to compare the current effective version to this archived version that we were just looking at, the most recent previous version. But you can adjust these to, whichever versions you would prefer to compare. And this is going to show us, everything that the new version of the statute deleted and everything that it added. You can see that with the red strike throughs, those are the deletions, and the green highlights are going to be the additions. And this just allows us to quickly ascertain any changes in the law, and that can be really useful when you're advising a client that maybe is contemplating some complex transaction, or something along those lines. Okay, let's look at the same thing on Westlaw really quickly. We've got the same features available here, although some of the naming conventions, some of the organization that we see is a little bit different. So we scroll past the statutory text, and here it's called the credits section. And, it does give us, the last time that law was amended. And if we want to actually look at that previous version of the law, we can go to the History tab here. And then we would want to click on Versions. And then we could just choose any of these prior versions. And really, with Westlaw, I like the interface just a little bit more because it very helpfully, just specifies our effective dates for each specific version, so we don't have to do as much work to find those out and research those. And as you can see, it does allow us to do our compare versions from the History tab here, but we can also, do it from the statute itself through compare versions here. And it's just going to default to comparing the most recent versions. And it uses very similar conventions to what we saw on Lexis. We've got the green highlights to represent additions, and then the red strike throughs to represent deletions. Okay, so yeah, that is historical statutes. And I really think that once you kind of wrap your head around, this concept of, finding a prior version of a statute that governed past conduct, once you kind of wrap your head around that idea, the actual research part of it is not that difficult. It's especially if it's, in the recent past, if you're not going way into the reaches of history, it's pretty accessible right here on Westlaw or Lexis. And it's really pretty intuitive once you get used to it anyway. Okay, that's all I have for now. Until next time.